raised reef area, and there's an eel right there. It was crazy. All right, I think that our audio is live, and we are live. Welcome back to Season 2 of Max and Ben Save the World.
On this chilly evening in Minnesota.
Yeah, it is quite cold.
It's very cold, yes. Yeah. Awesome. Well, we're glad you're here, joining us for Season 2. Today's topic is The Lord of the Rings and men's mental health, and I have to say I'm a little excited about that.
Yeah, I am too. How long have you been a fan of The Lord of the Rings?
I think that I watched the movies, and my mom read the books to me when I was very, very young, and it's something that has always just held a really close place to my heart, I would say.
Same. I have a similar experience.
Okay.
Before we get too far into the Lord of the Rings, I just want to share that while Max and I are both therapists in the state of Minnesota, that doesn't necessarily mean that this is a substitute for therapy. This podcast is not therapy. We do recommend that you go to therapy. It's a wonderful thing, and you might be able to learn some information about mental health from this podcast. But again, we reiterate, it is not a replacement for therapy.
Go to therapy.
As well as that, I think that we've got a little bit of a recognition from Max today.
I would like to recognize... I'm making this up on the spot.
Hey, yo, that's the podcast. It is live.
It is live.
Welcome, everybody on Twitch. We're back, Season 2.
We are back.
It's raw. I'm giving them time to think.
Now I'm laughing about it. Can I do the recognition at the halftime?
Yeah, we can call that.
Sounds like
that's
a
a
good
halftime.
idea.
That's an audible.
It's an audible
for those of us.
Audible at halftime. Very professional.
Using football references.
So.
Masculinity podcast.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Well, today we're talking about Lord of the Rings, which is also a wealth of conversation that we could have around masculinity. It's a tale that was intended and set out to be a self-contained universe where the author, J.R. Tolkien, could create these stories, and ultimately only a small portion of it ends up, of the history of Middle-earth, ends up being The Lord of the Rings and the book The Hobbit, which is the majority of people's, I guess I would say baseline fans' lens of the material.
It is.
Say that's accurate?
Yeah, I would say that's accurate. And I feel like Lord of the Rings nowadays is one of those very basic fandoms where, if you kind of identify as a nerd, it is extremely likely that you have encountered Lord of the Rings and this content in some form of the book or the movies or, the newer Hobbit movies or maybe the older Hobbit movies. And so I feel like, yes, the Silmarillion, the text that describes everything else that happens in Middle-earth, exists, but Lord of the Rings is, I feel like, a really, really pervasive kind of cultural world that is a part of our zeitgeist. And so we thought it would be really valuable to examine in terms of the masculinity that is displayed there.
Yeah. And I think interesting to talk about before we get into the characters as well is the author, right? A lot of material when critically analyzing it from an artistic lens suggests the death of the author, but I think in this instance, to start with, talking about J.R. Tolkien's life just a little bit is important for us as we go in and analyze what we can reflect about masculinity, what he has to say about men and what they ought to or ought not to do. I think it's important to note that much of the stories of the second and third age of Middle-earth come from his experiences when the world was at war, and he himself often cited that the relationship between Frodo and Sam was largely based on the I forget the official military term for it, but the attendant to the officer that he was during his time in the war. And the industrialization themes that are seen in the Two Towers come from this overarching fear of the progress of machinery in mankind and the destructive path that warfare leads through the countryside. And despite all of those experiences, he comes home, and and many of the components of Lord of the Rings are then married with the conversations and stories that he told to his wife. He wrote poetry about and submitted to literature publications of the time, and he told to his children. And so, in connecting these really adult and terrifying and often trauma-inducing experiences with the need for telling stories to one's own children about knights and people that do good and overcome great evil, and what does that look like, was a task that was incredibly important to him, as well as his own idiosyncrasies around really enjoying language and cultures and wanting to invent his own for just to have something to do with it. He often said that he wrote Elvish before he wrote the books. But I think one of the most interesting and the first guy that's going to come up, I think you get one of two. Who would you say are the two first dudes that are going to come up?
I think it's about every teenage girl's crush. It's going to be Aragorn or it's going to be Legolas.
Oh, we got Aragorn and Legolas. Okay, I'll give you three. Your first two were, one of them was the same. My first two were Aragorn and Frodo. I think, like, if you're saying Lord of the Rings, dudes, right? I would even say Elijah Wood and Viggo Mortensen, like, come to mind immediately.
In their embodiment, yes.
When I think of Lord of the Rings. But I do think, once you say it, Legolas, right? Orlando Bloom's on the cover of all three of the posters, right?
And I think that there's an interesting distinction there that we had those divergent experiences. I think that Frodo sometimes and the hobbits are seen as kind of like boys, whereas like the Aragorn, like Gimli, Legolas party is seen more as like, men. And so I think that there is some like divergence there in some people's experiences. But I think that they all show masculinity in a lot of really different and interesting ways.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think about it a lot. I wonder if there's something to that, in that people get Elijah Wood and Daniel Radcliffe from Harry Potter mixed up all the time.
Really?
And they were like both popular franchises at the same time.
They were.
Yeah. And they're both like I mean, Elijah Wood I think is American, but he's speaking in an English accent for the movies.
Yep.
And then Daniel Radcliffe is this little British boy, and they both have like black hair, but in the movies the hobbits are rather boyish. I never thought about, maybe that's why so many people get them mixed up.
Yeah, I think that Frodo's journey, if we're skipping ahead to, I guess, one person's masculinity,
Sure.
does feel like very much a typical hero's journey where there's a calling by kind of like an elder or some kind of higher power to go do something really great and important. And in that journey, he, kind of like goes through it, faces many trials, and ultimately completes it and kind of like becomes a man, or has a coming of age story. But I think it's interesting for Frodo because he doesn't necessarily grow up because he's already grown up. He's kind of like an adult hobbit in the first place. I will say that Sam, like his best friend, has a wife and kids afterwards, and kind of goes from just like being a bachelor to being kind of like a family man, and so that's a change that does occur. But Frodo's journey does feel a little bit like the hero's journey, though I will say there's several hero's journeys if I think about them within the course of the series.
Well, let's break that down a little bit, like what the hero's journey looks like or is, right? I know that when you do that circle in like writing or like using it for like narrative therapy, there's like 6 points maybe on it, and right, you've always got the hero usually has, we've usually got like an orphan or strange parents, right? Frodo's parents are not around. He's got this cool Uncle Bilbo that went on a crazy adventure that no one in his village had done before, right? Luke Skywalker has that kooky Uncle Ben living out in the desert looking after him, holding on to a relic of his father, right? The ring being held by Bilbo is this thing from outside the village that eventually a stranger comes to the village and threatens the sanctity of the village. The necessity of the hero is such that they must leave, and they go out. Usually they experience right here on the circle, if I'm going around, they experience like a interaction or a calling or I'm trying to think it's a handshake symbol on the little picture, but it's they get recruited by some kind of divine force, a deity, something helps them.
Gandalf in Frodo's case.
Right? Yeah, and then they descend into Hades, they descend into chaos, the afterlife, death, somewhere that no one in their village has ever been before, and usually something they acquired from the deity is what gets them out of Hades, out of the afterlife. It's what Orpheus he plays the harp and then he leaves with Eurydice, right? They come out of the afterlife. Usually they've learned something that no one else in their village could have known because of all of that experience, and then they go home and they use that advanced knowledge to better their village. They make their village, they learn the classic tale of bringing fire to the village, right? It would be going out, doing something scary and dangerous that no one's ever done before, and bringing it back.
And Ben, what do you think that the hero's journey has to do with masculinity specifically?
Oh, I think that it's rather interesting that, kind of as an academic study of the way that stories are made, we just have this agreed upon principle that it's just known that a young man or woman, but often in our literary history, a young man is going to be called away from their village to go do something dangerous, and then they'll learn something. Maybe they'll go do something that the village says they should not, right? The hero's journey is also a non-masculine example. Here is Moana directly,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Yeah. That
She
girls go
changes
through
fundamentally
those journeys too.
Yes, but
Yes.
right, the fundamentally going out, having an adventure that goes outside the bounds of safety or reality, breaking the rules a little bit, right? Doing something a little bit scary or a little bit hard, something that maybe your father hasn't done, and then bringing that back to the village and doing something good with it is so integral to the way that we tell stories. We can observe that we've been telling stories that way since we started telling them.
And I feel like the hero's journey is really ingrained into just our cultures and many cultures, kind of like masculine identity. Mm-hmm. That men uniquely have this need to go out and do something that feels big mm-hmm. and important, and that it supports their fundamental need for competence. And like you said, Ben, there's a lot of situations where, like Moana exists, obviously, and has kind of like a hero's journey there. I would say even like what comes to mind oddly is like Legally Blonde, a lawyer.
Yeah,
a female lawyer goes into like
incredible
a law school, very patriarchal kind of situation, comes out with a triumph at the mm-hmm. end, and I think about just some of the final scenes there, and I'm like, that's actually really, really powerful about a woman being a hero. But I think that obviously anyone can have an experience of a hero's journey, but I do think that sometimes men, at least in the way that it was initially baked into our culture a long time ago, men uniquely have that need to go and do that, and I think that that's really seen in The Lord of the Rings. If we are zooming in on hobbits a little bit, Frodo achieves, kind of greatness by throwing the ring into Mount Doom. Sam, supports Frodo through this journey. And
he carries his friend when his friend couldn't walk.
Yes.
Which I think is significant. And actually, I think that one of the interesting things by applying that generic hero's journey, right? And we think about, like, you got to leave the village, you got to slay a dragon, you got to save the princess, you got to go home. They don't. And I think that there's something important about that. They don't kill the dragon. And actually, Bilbo's grandfather doesn't kill the dragon. He steals a ring from the back cavern of the dragon and gets away by tricking him. J.R.R. Tolkien shows us ways that we don't necessarily have to slay the dragon like St. George, the classic Germanic tale of going out, killing a dragon, saving the princess from the tower that it's guarding, and going home. Samwise does not kill a dragon. He gets his friend away from that giant spider.
Shelob.
I was gonna say Shieldred, but that is
Shelob. Yeah. No, that's Magic the Gathering.
That's a different spider.
If you're thinking about the Magic the Gathering card, it's Shelob, Child of Ungoliant.
There we go.
That
right.
6 mana, difficult to deal with spider.
But which was difficult to deal with for the hobbits, and they don't slay it, right? The mithril, the thing given to them by a divine force earlier in the story, right, stops the poison or whatever. Again, but I think that there's something important that's said in what's being not said there in so many of the heroes' journeys. We do have Aragorn, who does, in a traditional sense, go recruit an army and then leads them to battle successfully in a military campaign. Right, that's one of the closest things we get to slaying a dragon. Gandalf kills a Balrog, conceivably, dropping down an infinite pit. But many of our heroes as well, Merry and Pippin, recruit friends along the way. Right, it's Merry. I believe I get them mixed up quite often, but I'm pretty sure it's Merry that becomes friends with Éowyn,
Yes.
Who is the woman who slays the Witch King, who fulfills that prophecy that no man shall ever slay the Witch King, right? He's the one that sings for Theoden. He befriends kings, right? And that's a different path, but it is still leaving the village.
You are getting them confused. Pippin sings for Denethor, and it's a very
sings for Denethor.
Somber scene.
No, I'm thinking, yes, it probably is Pippin that then sings afterwards, though. But they become friends, and they stay and sing. After everything's done, they stay and sing in the halls of Aragorn.
Oh, sure,
with Arwen for evermore and all of that. But you do have Gimli and Legolas and Aragorn, which I would argue are more of a
traditional, maybe thought of like masculine component. But I don't know, something else that's coming to mind is I feel like there's a quote from Faramir in the books that I believe is written on his Magic the Gathering card that says something like, "I care not for the sword, but for that which it defends." And to me, that really is kind of what a hero does in mythology. Is he's not necessarily going out to conquer something. It's not about conquest necessarily, which I think we also think of as a very masculine kind of thing to do, but really about defense and defense of that which you love. And to me, that I think that Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, they're not necessarily they might seem more traditionally masculine in that every teenage boy kind of wanted to be them, growing up and playing the Lord of the Rings, the Two Towers video game. Like, I remember being like, yeah, Aragorn, a little bit.
Right? Yeah, you want to be the guy that's dual-wielding swords and cutting orcs in half and, throwing ghosts at people and shit. Yeah, you want to be that guy.
You do.
I think interesting, though, is Gimli to me, specifically because in his story, when they go to the Wood Elves and they meet with Galadriel, him knowing previously that another dwarf hero in, I believe, the First Age had asked Galadriel for a strand of her hair because she was so beautiful to behold. And dwarves famously love jewels and diamonds and things that sparkle and shine, and she denied it to him. He wasn't pure enough of heart. He wasn't a good enough dwarf. And after their adventure, when Gimli asks Galadriel for a single strand of her hair, she gives him 3. And I think that there's something to be said about that journey and that experience as a man. I think that there's almost a poetic reflection in there in seeking validation for one's appearance, for one's qualities, for one's traits, right? For his race, he wanted to be the best dwarf.
I mean, ultimately, I think that what I feel like J.R. Tolkien was trying to write in there is that there was racism between elves and dwarves, and that, back 100 years ago, the elves did not trust the dwarves well enough to be like, no, you can't have a strand of hair. Mm-hmm. But, in the modern age, the dwarf approached her courageously asking, can we think about this again? Can we revisit this? And she's like, actually, yes. And here's some extra. Yeah. Here's some more. I'm willing to, just say, hey, let's do better than our ancestors had. And I think that was a nice thing to take a look at. It shows some change over time.
Yeah, and I think that seeking out the maiden fair in the forest and asking her for a strand of her hair is different than, again, slaying the dragon, save the princess from the tower, right? It's a new, or it is a variation that in its act of varying from the norm speaks something. I think similarly about Boromir.
Yeah, I think that he's a very complicated character to visit, to be honest.
Yeah.
He experiences temptation, is normally what most people think of when they think of Boromir. I feel like Boromir is only in the first movie and everyone kind of forgets about him and they remember him suddenly when the Return of the King comes around and Pippin goes to visit Denethor and suddenly it's a big deal again. Mm-hmm. But Boromir, wants to go, why not use the ring against... Sauron was one of the first things that he says in the Council of Elrond there. And to me, that's interesting because it's almost like, well, even if it is an evil tool, the ends must justify the means somehow. Why not do something, good with it? And what's interesting is that it seems to support the notion that J.R.R. Tolkien wanted to say that absolute power corrupts absolutely, and also that the ring would only answer to Sauron is I guess a plot wise reason there. But if you're gonna be doing something truly evil, it would only answer to, I guess, true evil.
I think interesting though to think about Boromir's brother's quote, "I care not for the sword, but for what it defends."
Yeah.
That philosophy doesn't seem too far off from Boromir's philosophy when he presents the idea of using it as a weapon against Sauron. He had spent his entire life right next to the Black Gate, right, and being the heir to the stewardship of Gondor, right?
Yeah.
To him, the ring may have appeared as a sword, right? And the temptation part certainly doesn't change regardless. It's interesting to me. It seems internally consistent, as I would assume he would agree with his brother's quote there.
It's interesting because we all think about the bad things that Boromir did, but he said, by the blood of my people have your people been kept safe. This is a guy who, to your point, was at Osgiliath, right by Mordor, for like so long. And this dude is, trying to just like protect everyone from it, and he sees, an easy out to be like, oh my gosh, let's just blow that shit up. And he wants to blow that shit up.
I think that there's also an important point in that, like, yeah, we focus a lot on he turns to temptation, right? Frodo has to run from him. But in his death, in his final moments, right, he does relay to Aragorn that they took the little ones. And I think that there's also something significant and important in that portrayal of the character, in that, to use like a wrestling term, I'm not a wrestling fan, but I know it. That heel turn that he has, where we glimpse that evil, that corruption for a moment, seems to be reversed in his dying moments. And I think that that's not for nothing. I think that J.R.R. Tolkien, I would suggest that J.R.R. Tolkien might be attempting to share with the audience that, or the viewers or the readers, that good men make mistakes. That it is not that goodness isn't an inherent black and white quality that one simply is or is not. It's a regular, repeated choice, and he failed to make the correct choice, and even still near death, he was able to make a correct choice afterwards.
It's interesting because even if you've made a bunch of bad choices, you can make a good choice like at the end.
Yeah.
And even if you made a lot of good choices, you can make a bad choice in the end. That might be like a Saruman kind of thing. That goodness is something that you kind of have to continue to try and do, to be heroic and to do the right thing, even when it's not easy for you. I think about when Frodo and Sam were climbing up, Mount Doom, and we shouldn't have left the Shire. It's kind of like the thought that comes to their head, where they're like, we really shouldn't have done this. I wish none of this had ever happened. And it's hard because that what they did was so important, and that they're better people, better men for it. They definitely achieved something. They did what was necessary, but at the same time, like you kind of look at them and it's like, man, that really sucks that they had to burden that responsibility for the whole world.
Yeah. That actually reminds me, our little list here of characters, we hadn't even thought about Gollum.
Gollum, yeah, we hadn't listed Gollum on our list. You're right.
Yeah.
And he's a very complex character for sure.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately he was tempted by the ring and killed his friend to take the ring, as we learned in the Return of the King kind of opening scene there. And it's very disturbing to see that someone could actually do that. And then over time he was corrupted by the ring, and it was the only thing that mattered to him, was just having this little kind of trinket of power. And then it's arguable what he was actually doing for a lot of the story, whether he was trying to just be around the ring to take it back, or if he was actually trying to help. He was kind of in this like weird double agent sort of place. Yeah.
What do you make of his relationship with Frodo near the end?
I think that Frodo looks at him and understands that this could be him if he doesn't make the right decision. And interestingly, I mean, I think of the scene in the movie where Frodo is like, "No, I'm not gonna throw it away," and then puts the ring on, like in Mount Doom and whatever. I do think about like that. That's pretty intense, and I think that Frodo does look at Gollum and sees himself if he doesn't do that. And I think that it is a little poetic that they have to kind of wrestle in Mount Doom, and that Gollum falls into the lava with the ring.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too that to me it seems as though some of the feelings that Sam presents having towards Gollum to Frodo, and like the incredulousness that I think, especially in the movie, Sean Astin really conveys of why are you keeping this guy around, really seems to be going through Sam's head.
Oh yeah,
all the time,
hardcore.
And and I think that's underlying in that is Sam having this view of Frodo that, of course, you will not become Gollum. You will not be like Smeagol. That thing is not you. And believing in his friend so intensely, it is ridiculous to him, right? That his friend would let Gollum hang around.
I also think that Gollum is a little bit for the reader to see what the ring is really capable of, what power can really do to someone, make them just really a corrupt person in a lot of ways if they really let it. And I think it is interesting what Frodo, how Frodo kind of views Gollum and their relationship there.
Yeah. Do you think this is a good time for a transition?
I think it is, and I think I'm ready to recognize someone. I will go ahead and recognize my brother Sam. I love you very much. You're a good man.
What up, brother Sam? Yo, season 2. Shout out number 1. While I'm getting prepared for our reading that I have here, would you mind checking the chat? I can't see it from that.
Yeah, it looks like Never Dove is saying, "Yay, we're back," and I love LOTR.
Nice.
Yeah, with my 2020 vision over here. So
Hell
good.
Yeah.
It did not take me any time at all to try and read that chat from a distance.
It's taking me some time. Well, I have here a reading from a poem that, I'm going to full disclosure, I heard somebody else read on TikTok, and it was incredible. It was not just one that, it was something that I just couldn't swipe away from, and then I had to immediately go look up the poem and the author, and so I'm going to introduce for our fun segment today a poem that I think is similar in vibe to the source material here. Yeah. And it's by an author named I'm going to butcher this name probably, but it's Tom Hirons. Okay. He is a Scottish English poet. Has a really interesting series that he's been doing recently on poems that reflect the current state of Palestine and Gaza, that are very powerful and very moving from a Western voice that is not living in Palestine. He's got a very interesting way of writing that I think that you'll hear here, that I hope you, our viewers, and you will check out if you enjoy this. So this is called Sometimes a Wild God.
Okay.
Sometimes a wild god comes to the table. He is awkward and does not know the ways of porcelain, of fork and mustard and silver. His voice makes vinegar from wine. When the wild god arrives at the door, you will probably fear him. He reminds you of something dark that you might have dreamt, or the secret you do not wish to be shared. He will not ring the doorbell. Instead, he scrapes with his fingers, leaving blood on the paintwork, though primroses grow in circles around his feet. You do not want to let him in. You are very busy. It is late or early, and besides, you cannot look at him straight, because he makes you want to cry. Your dog barks. The wild god smiles. He holds out his hand, and the dog licks his wounds, then leads him inside. The wild god stands in your kitchen. Ivy is taking over your sideboard. Mistletoe has moved into the lampshades, and wrens have begun to sing an old song in the mouth of your kettle. I haven't much, you say, and give him the worst of your food. He sits at the table bleeding. He coughs up foxes. There are otters in his eyes. When your wife calls down, you close the door and tell her that it's fine. You will not let her see the strange guest at your table. The wild god asks for whiskey, and you pour a glass for him, then a glass for yourself. 3 snakes are beginning to nest in your voice box. You cough. O limitless space, O eternal mystery, O endless cycle of death and birth, O miracle of life, O the wondrous dance of it all. You cough again, expectorate the snakes, and water down the whiskey, wondering how you got so old and where your passion went. The wild god reaches into a bag made of moles and nightingale skin. He pulls out a 2-reeded pipe, raises an eyebrow, and all the birds begin to sing. The foxes leap into your eyes. Otters rush from the darkness. The snakes pour through your body. Your dog howls, and upstairs your wife both exults and weeps all at once. The wild god dances with your dog. You dance with the sparrows. A white stag pulls up a stool and bellows hymns to enchantments. A pelican leaps from chair to chair. In the distance, warriors pour from their tombs. Ancient gold grows like grass in the fields. Everyone dreams the words to long-forgotten songs. The hills echo and the gray stones ring with laughter and madness and pain. In the middle of the dance, the house takes off from the ground. Clouds climb through the windows. Lightning pounds its fists on the table and the moon leans in. The wild god points to your side. You're bleeding heavily. You have been bleeding for a long time. Possibly since you were born. There's a bear in the wound. Why did you leave me to die? Asks the wild god, and you say, I was busy surviving. The shops were all closed. I didn't know how. I'm sorry. Listen to them. The fox in your neck, and the snakes in your arms, and the wren and the sparrow and the deer, the great unnameable beasts in your kidney and your liver and your heart. There's a symphony of howling, a cacophony of dissent. The wild god nods his head, and you wake on the floor holding a knife, a bottle, and a handful of black fur. Your dog is asleep on the table. Your wife is stirring far above. Your cheeks are wet with tears. Your mouth aches from laughter or shouting. A black bear is sitting by the fire. Sometimes a wild god comes to the table. He is awkward and does not know the ways of porcelain, of fork and mustard and silver. His voice makes vinegar from wine, and he brings the dead to life. That was Sometimes a Wild God by Tom Hirons.
That's incredible.
Yeah, I thought it was nuts.
It is nuts. It really captures, I think, a lot of dilemmas that many men have these days.
Yeah.
I understand that I read an article that a lot of young men are going back to church because they're finding that their lives are devoid of meaning. And I think that whether or not people have gone back to church or whatever religious service they choose, I think that a lot of men are really searching for meaning.
Yeah.
And I think that the wild god in that poem represents the meaning that a lot of men are searching for, that somehow feels foreign from women. I like how the wife is kind of like upstairs, and he kind of has to do his own thing independently, and it's wild. That it's kind of, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't have to make sense. Is sort of what the poem posits. What were your reactions to this poem?
Yeah, I thought it was, to me, I really felt like the wild god represented this, like, loosely, I feel like it's this amorphous feeling or thought of a connection to our animalistic roots, our nature, in and of ourselves, across time and through our ancestry and through that transcends, an individual being. I feel like the wild god as a visitor to one's house is the reminder that the earth still turns while we make plans inside our own home, and that we can't escape the reality that we're tied and connected to it, that time passes inside and outside of the house, that connecting to those roots are often cut off by our society in ways that are convenient to us. The line that's in there about when the wild god asks, why haven't you let me in, or why haven't you spoken with me? and the reader, say the stores were all closed. I think is so interesting.
It's
To
a little
me,
absurdist to say
yeah,
that. Well, the wildness. The stores were closed, so I couldn't go get you. Is
yeah.
actually quite absurd.
I immediately imagine like,
Yeah.
oh, I couldn't go buy a tent. I can't go camping, right? Is the like, oh, I think that's the feeling that I'm drawn to there. But I think that is only one layer of it. I think when you put all of the things together, and the wild god dances with your dog, and you drink with it, and then you ask yourself, how did I get so old? And it evokes all of these thoughts or these images of like someone encountering a personification of the passage of time and the progress of nature taking its course. Um,
I also think that it represents kind of like the wild masculine. If you were to look at like Robert Bly's Iron John,
mhm.
and I guess to me, we were talking about the hero's journey earlier,
Mhm.
and to do something that feels like you're accomplishing something, to achieve a sense of competence.
Mhm.
I think that a lot of guys will also get into a family of whatever, where they're married with kids, and they're in their job, they come home, and then they kind of look in the mirror and they go, is this really all that there is?
Mhm.
I thought there might have been more to life.
Mhm.
There's the desire to kind of ascend and to do more, and I think the wild god represents that, and I like that he's a god because sometimes it feels like it is a part of the divine masculine, like uniquely, as some would understand it.
Mhm. Yeah, I thought the language, especially the in far off fields, warriors rise from their tombs. Really, there was a lot of very like. I think that the argument that J.R.R. Tolkien has impacted all fantasy literature
Yes.
after him is kind of a moot argument at this point. Of course, there are influences from Tolkien in the imagery there and the way that the romanticization of that stanza that's talking about the hills with golden fields and warriors rising from their tombs and the gray stones in the circle is the triumphant things good are happening part of the poem, and that this is romanticizing these motifs that are from Tolkien's setting. Prior to that, goblins, orcs, fantasy, wizards, knights was much less prevalent and certainly not collected in the way that no one had done it like him.
But it's unique in that the modern man encounters the wild god, and I feel like I'm left with, and I'm Mr. Questions. Therapists ask questions, right? What do you think the modern man should do about the wild god if he encounters them? Because I feel like there's definitely times that I, might encounter this dilemma. Maybe like, I'm trying to grow my private practice while I'm also working in my other job, and it feels like, sometimes I'm caught in this like, well, am I doing what's really like my passion, or am I just kind of like grinding because I have to like eat, sort of a thing?
Yeah.
Well, what does a modern man like actually do about kind of this wild god, or like the need to be wild or to do something divergent?
Yeah, I think that to me, that's a really good question, and what I hear is that this is sorry, I'm just going to directly answer you. I think you should pick up a hobby. I think that
Okay.
whatever it is, right? That seems interesting. I think that there's some level to me that my experience of this poem makes me want to like carve a bow out of wood and then make the string from the sinew of a deer and like fire that bow. It also makes me want to blacksmith something. It makes me want to carve something from stone. I think that there's, I would argue, I don't know, Tom's not here, I can't ask him, but I think that the author, to me, seems to be evoking I think that there's especially in going back to the lines like, the stores weren't open, I think that like that kind of like, as it's comedically played in Parks and Rec, that Ron Swanson Renaissance man approach to like one's way of being, I think that there is a disconnect in our society today of the food that you eat on your table, and I'm not saying that this is a good or a bad thing, but you didn't kill
You don't
that
know
cow,
where it came from.
right? You didn't raise or slaughter that chicken. You didn't grow that corn. You don't know the guy that grew that corn. And I think that there's something to be said about the same way that, living, in a modern lifestyle, we know that our animal needs require activity. And so we build gyms and we go to gyms, right? And we work out our bodies. I think that there's some level that this is calling for us to appreciate the idea that we need a connection to the land. We need a connection to nature. Whether that's going camping, whether that's getting into astrology, whether that's rock climbing or mountain biking or whatever it is that motivates you to get outside and motivates you to connect with the economy of living is what I would call it. Of you don't have to make everything and you don't have to go do every part from scratch, but picking up pickling or learning how to smoke meat or book binding sounds really cool. I would love to learn book binding. Right? But connecting with those ways of being that I think connect us not only with ourselves, but with other people. Often what you'll find when you go do something like that is if you really like it, you're going to meet other people that do that thing too. And then you have a community of people that are also connecting with that wild God, with that experience of being, I think, human together.
Yeah. What's so interesting, Ben, is that I had totally divergent reading from that.
Oh yeah.
I didn't think about hobbies at all. I will say that I did think about nature. I think that reading this poem, it's hard to not look at it and think that you're supposed to do something kind of masculine. It's a little bit more wild, and I think that going into nature can certainly be one of those things. But I felt more compelled about I really need to achieve my life's purpose. I went to get my PhD because I wanted to kind of do specialty boys and men's mental health and help masculinity kind of evolve and do podcasts like this and other stuff like this. And it feels like doing this is actually what gives life to me. And I'd really like this to be a part of the rest of my career, which is again why I'm here. But the wild God in this case represents to me achieving my dreams and doing the thing that I actually set out to want to do with the rest of my life. And if I actually put other things on hold to not achieve my dreams, then that I guess if I put my dreams on hold to do other things, that feels like I'm kind of waiting for the wild God to sort of come back in. And I feel like if I am kind of truly grounding myself in my workouts or even taking a nature walk, I feel like I come back and I'm like, I remember my purpose is I want to make sure that guys have access to mental health services too, and that men feel confident in being who they are, and that boys can grow up to be happy and confident men. Yeah.
I think that's not surprising of a reading, because I think that there's a significant portion of it is seemingly written as this prescriptive, here, listen to this story of someone that left the wild God outside too long, right?
Yeah.
They didn't pursue what it means to be human, what it means to be a man.
Or what it means to be a man to them. Because I think that if you're looking from a humanist perspective, a lot of times people say that people create kind of their own meaning. And some people see that through their faith, and some other people see that through the things that they do. And for many people, a lot of their meaning is just community. And so if they do find a hobby where they're, in the smoking meat, that's good for them. But otherwise, I think that it's about connecting with your deeper meaning and something that makes you uniquely you, that only you know how to find, that you have to create kind of yourself. I mean, we should probably start talking about Lord of the Rings again at some point here. But I feel like my kind of final thought on this poem is the biological default of actually most fetuses in development is female, right? And for a fetus to actually become male, it has to be exposed to androgens in the womb. And so even from that early on, men and boys are diverging. Obviously there's intersex condition and whatever else, going on too, but men are diverging from the very, very beginning. And I think that the wild God or the wild man, is kind of representing how men, are wanting to and crave to diverge from what everyone else kind of expects them to do.
That makes me think of the Minecraft quote, "The children yearn for the mines."
Oh, from the trailer?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
For the Minecraft movie?
it's common in the Minecraft community.
Okay.
The children yearn for the mines. They must mine. Um, speaking of setting them to the mines, let's talk about Saruman.
Okay.
Saruman the White.
Yeah, a wizard in jeez, I almost said Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings.
Wizard, so powerful he made it to Harry Potter as well.
Yeah. So Saruman is the bad guy in Lord of the Rings. If you see The Hobbit, he's actually kind of like a good guy. Christopher Lee plays him, does an outstanding job. And he had been, governing and helping along a lot of different peoples in Middle Earth for a very long time, but began using his Palantir to talk with Sauron, and Sauron ended up kind of like corrupting his mind and bringing him over to his side. And then he decides to cut down his entire forest, upsetting the Ents around him, to build an army of war to proceed in Sauron's conquest of Middle Earth.
What do you think Tolkien is telling us about, names being similar aside, right? Saruman being a servant of Sauron, who in and of himself, right, the surface level deep lore, is a servant of Morgoth, right? And so there is this repetition of it seems like everybody serves somebody else, and even for the main story, the main bad guy is just a servant of essentially Middle Earth's devil incarnate,
evil god. Yes. Yeah. I mean, the lore is there, but to me, I feel like Saruman is someone who is in political power, does a lot of things, is extraordinarily influential in Middle Earth. And I feel like he's almost there to show the damage that people in power can do to a cause that is just and totally reasonable. Which, honestly, if Saruman had used his resources and wisdom to aid Gandalf in getting to where he needed to go, there would have been one less giant army. Really, there would have been a whole movie missed out there. The Two Towers just gone because Saruman just didn't get the arrogance to talk to Sauron. I also think that there was he's talking to Sauron and thinks that he can kind of handle it and just keep an eye on him, when actually that's not really the case. It's that Sauron is able to manipulate him. That there's this idea that you're invincible that I think Saruman kind of had, that wasn't exactly true. And I think that a lot of men do have it in their heads that they are kind of invincible and can't really do any wrong. And I think that when you do feel like you're invincible and can't do any wrong, I mean, certainly there's times that, if you're confident in doing your job and you're just doing your job and you kind of have the feelings of, yep, I'm doing my thing right, I'm doing this, I'm not doing it wrong, that can be good. But I think there's other times when you feel like you can't be wrong, and then you kind of get stuck there.
That's when you make a mistake.
And I will say that from experience, because sometimes I will, say things or do things, and I'll be like, this is how it is going to be, and this is how it should be, and actually I'm not correct about that. I might have to be wrong and have to go sit in a corner and think about it for a little bit. But unfortunately, Saruman didn't have that luxury because there was magic involved.
Yeah, and I think that there's something interesting to be said about his character seemingly presenting himself from the perspective of I'm still the good guy. This was something I think essentially his late philosophy ends up being, this is always going to happen to Middle Earth, and so I'm making the best of a bad situation, and that's an interesting. I think that there's something poignant in that. I think that Tolkien is telling us that oftentimes some of the greatest evils come from people that are well-meaning, right? The particularly the indifference to the means. I think the destruction of the forest, the creating of the Uruk-hai, demonstrate an indifference to the destruction that is the antecedent to this army that he's creating, to the greater good that he thinks that he's championing. And I think that Tolkien is saying something about people in political power with that.
Yeah, I do know that and I can't even quite know what year Lord of the Rings was written, but if we're talking about World War I, a very prominent figure was Otto von Bismarck and his Realpolitik, well, the ends will justify the means
Mhm.
a little bit. Ultimately, it was kind of his thing. And I mean, if you can get there and everyone's kind of at peace, Saruman was just like, it's okay. We'll just live under Sauron. Everyone will be at peace, and no one will die anymore.
Yeah.
But we have to just get there first.
Yeah, I would definitely say that he's demonstrating that the ends will justify the means philosophy taken to a certain extreme, right? To a literary or narrative extreme. Yeah.
Machiavellian.
Let's talk a little bit about Wormtongue and Theoden.
Yeah, the dynamic there.
Yeah. I think that Theoden's a good king, right? That's clearly the message that was intended to be given to you if you were, watching the movies or reading the books. We're supposed to get the sense that Theoden is a good king who has an evil person whispering in his ear. Would you agree?
I mean, I think so, but I also think that Theoden is somewhat arrogant and was a little hesitant to go to aid Gondor after they did not aid him.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that ultimately Theoden makes the right decision each time. And yeah, I think that he does. Gandalf does question his decision to go into Helm's Deep in the Two Towers, though, where he thinks that there's not necessarily like the best decisions, that he's walking into a trap there, that all of Rohan will be there in one place, and that's not good. That's exactly what Saruman wants. So I think that he has kind of like a pride thing. The idea was that Helm's Deep is impossible to breach. Like you couldn't possibly ever breach it. And lo and behold, they had those little kamikaze like Uruk-hai.
What's the thing that they yelled? Is it the Grond? The
Grond is with the Gondor battle.
Oh, that's not Helm's Deep when they bring in when they have the guy and he runs with the. He's got the flame. And
he is the flame.
And
yes.
then they got the big battering ram.
The battering ram is the battering ram with the dragon is at the Battle of Minas Tirith in Gondor.
I'll be damned.
Grond is over there. I'm pretty sure someone in our viewers, please correct us if I'm wrong. But I think my nerd cred is like real right now. That the Grond battering ram is the Minas Tirith battle, and the little Uruk-hai berserker who has the blowy up like a barrel. That is Helm's Deep, and that's how they breach the wall. And Theoden's pride is wounded there. So
damn.
Yeah. In any case, yeah, Theoden is supposed to be kind of like, I think he's a stereotypical good king, but ultimately he's someone who is trying to do the right thing, but definitely has kind of this image of pride might get in his way. Sometimes I do think that there's a little bit of like hubris kind of flaw there.
I think he was too proud to say that Wormtongue was influencing him, and that's part of the reason that
the magic spell ended up being so bad.
Yeah. All right, who do you want to talk about next?
I think that I'm interested in talking about Isildur a little bit.
Yeah.
So Isildur is one of the characters at the very beginning of the first movie. You kind of see him, and he's the guy who decides to not throw the ring into Mount Doom, and it kind of sets the entire plot in motion.
Basically does what Boromir is suggesting that they do later.
Yes, that Boromir suggests they do later. And he's the ancestor of Aragorn. And Aragorn, kind of like admonishes, the same blood runs through my veins a little bit. I think that there's something to be said there. If you're a modern man, I think that you definitely had, I know I've experienced like male guilt before. And I feel like, to me, Isildur kind of represents the legacy of like our fathers, like, kind of sins or mistakes, or like our forefathers, there's mistakes that they made, like, in the United States, maybe slavery, millions of other things across like world history, and it feels like the burden of that is the ring sometimes to me, and to actually take that and then go throw it into Mount Doom is an extremely noble thing to do, to actually make the world a better place from the mistakes that our forefathers made. So I kind of think that Isildur has a nice little metaphor there, that this is like there's actively like someone made a mistake this long ago that was selfish, it was arrogant, it allowed evil to live on just a little bit more, and to actually take that and then do something with that and throw the ring into Mount Doom, which really could be a metaphor, a lot of the other times, but this time it's the real thing. Throw the ring into Mount Doom. I think that it's a good little. I think it's a great plot device. Love it.
Yeah, I think Tolkien is definitely saying something about his Christian faith there as well, with original sin and the his awe at the concept of original sin being something that is inherited and then overcome through belief and through the Son of God coming, right? And so I think that he was wanting to present a similar concept in his Legendarium, and right, there's all sorts of quotes out there of Tolkien essentially describing that he wanted to create a feasible backstory minus Christianity to the British Isles and the British cultures that he thought would still result in England as it was today, but from a fantasy and historical perspective that was unique without Roman conquering. And I think that that's really interesting that despite not wanting the Roman conquering, the most famous Roman religion of all time, Christianity, still had such a significant influence on the way that he presented, right, the return of Gandalf, the idea of a king being hidden and coming back with an undead army, were all these fantastical elements that were drawing from that faith that was very real to him, which I think is quite interesting, that he was able to bring those things together. And I think at the time, right, the 1920s-ish when it's being published, seems a lot more safe than literarily or as an author writing a fantasy than I would say today. Whether it's one's own religion or another religion, I think that the idea of plucking them in order to regurgitate, I almost said but he certainly did more than simply regurgitate them. He did transform them, but I wonder if an author could get away with the same kind of thing today without being met with some heavy criticism. And I would say that would probably go for most, if not all, major religions would probably object to their core beliefs being turned into a novel or new fantasy concept.
Yeah, I'm interested. I feel like there's a lot of Christian fiction out there nowadays.
Oh, yeah.
That makes me
true.
think, well,
yeah.
I think there's I don't know, I remember always seeing the Left Behind series growing up, and I did grow up Christian, and so I'm not even familiar with a lot of that.
Yeah.
But, just seeing that some of that is out there, I think that there's a lot of that is
Yeah.
there. But yeah, I do think that it's impossible in the era that Tolkien is in to escape Christianity as an influence in the cultural zeitgeist. And honestly, even today, it feels like sometimes the question about divinity isn't necessarily what is your faith, but do you believe in God? And they're like, well, and then there's I might believe in a God, or might believe blah blah blah, and it always seems very Christian centric. So I think it's impossible to escape Christianity's influence, but I also think that what I do like about Tolkien is that his influence is from a lot of Norse sources too,
from a lot
especially
of
the runes
and Celtic as well.
The words there, So,
with that, I'm wondering if I could read us out our quote for today.
Yeah, I guess before we do that, should we just
do you
ask?
have anybody else that you want to add?
No, I feel like I almost just want to kind of have a conclusion, sort of thought. I feel like, you've got several different groups of guys here in The Lord of the Rings. You've kind of got, the hobbits, you got the Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin, who kind of feel a little bit more boyish at the beginning and kind of go on journeys to sort of become a little more masculine or manly. They go on a hero's journey sort of in their own ways. Merry into Rohan, Pippin into Gondor, and they show emotion. I think is one of the other things that I feel like we haven't mentioned yet today. I know the meme that I shared in preparation for this this episode today was that real men don't cry, and then real men was all the men of Lord of the Rings actually crying on screen as they kind of embrace each other and they show care for each other. One of the reasons that I thought this episode would be really cool to do is because of that here is a story where Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli are kicking ass, doing and taking names in several battles there, and they're doing super awesome things, but that they're also showing emotion and that they care for each other, and that Boromir says let them have a minute, for goodness sake. Like when Gandalf dies in Moria, that there is a recognition of really the emotional toll that you go through when you're doing something great like that. And I think that it really captures not only being heroic, but the dangers of power and the dangers of invincibility. And I think that The Lord of the Rings is a really great examination of the flaws that you might encounter in kind of like your masculine identity, and also a lot of really just great role models. So those are kind of my concluding statements.
Yeah, I think that to me, I think Lord of the Rings is one of the most exciting ideas that I think that you presented when we were talking about what we would do for season 2, and I think that's just because I sit in awe of it as this monolith or this figurehead of a pioneer in creating a subgenre. Like the high fantasy novel essentially didn't exist before, and so many of the pieces and components of it have been disseminated and spread throughout so many other pieces of our culture. Things like Dungeons and Dragons and Warhammer and World of Warcraft. Game of Thrones. The list goes on and on. Wouldn't exist without it, and I think that as a therapist that likes to use narrative-based techniques, it is such a good wealth of stories in all sorts of lengths and intensities and dynamics that can be tapped into for these ways that we can see reflections of ourselves. There isn't just one character in Lord of the Rings. There's tons and tons. And while some days we might feel like Frodo going up to Mount Doom, others we might feel like Frodo coming back to the Shire. And then the next we might feel like Aragorn in front of Arwen, right?
I feel like there's so much there too, Ben, and I feel like we could talk about Lord of the Rings for 2 hours.
Yeah, Lord of the Rings could be a whole season if it wanted to be.
If we really wanted to be, yeah.
But ultimately, I think that Lord of the Rings, to me, has been a really important narrative that allowed me to fill my mind with stories of knights overcoming dragons and monsters and going out and changing the world for the better. And I think the fact that those knights didn't always have to just wear a full suit of armor and a sword and a shield, they could look wildly different, was very inspiring to me.
Yeah, I think about when I'm having a tough day, I'll often watch, some Lord of the Rings, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a once a year watch at this house. All right. I have a closing quote for us here. I bet you'll never guess who it's by.
I can't guess, Ben.
Given what day it is today.
Today is Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
New economic patterning through automation is dissolving the jobs of workers in some of the nation's most basic industries. This is to me a catastrophe. We are neither technologically advanced nor socially enlightened if we witness this disaster for tens of thousands without first finding a solution. And by a solution, I mean a real and genuine alternative, providing the same living standards which were swept away by a force called progress, but which for some is just destruction. The society that performs miracles with machinery has the capacity to make some miracles for men, if it values men as highly as it values machines. Delivered on the 27th of April, 1961.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I thought that was a powerful quote. Incredibly timeless words from
it made me
Dr.
think
Martin
about
Luther King.
Our AI episode, to be honest, and the concern that men have of being replaced by AI, and really, I think a lot of workers nowadays experience that anxiety. Yeah,
I think that I'm cautiously optimistic that we as a society will find a way to value our men higher than we do machines, and that vision and that hope from Martin Luther King in 1961 is going in the right direction.
Yeah, that you have to hold the hope, and you also have to be the hope, because sometimes things don't go the way that you planned, and you have to hold the hope sometimes in those cases and be the hope if that is the case.
All right. There you have it. Thanks for joining us for the first episode of Season 2. Any other words before we head out, Max?
No, we're so looking forward to seeing you again next time.
Well, yeah, we'll see you in 2 weeks. And we're going to talk about